she's Afroz.
Yes.
She is education
academic coordinator.
MashaAllah.
In continuation of the public lecture series, I would like to welcome you to today's session, which is entitled Methods and Approaches to Tafsir. Our guest speaker today is Shaykh Mohammad Ismail, who after graduating in law studied in Qum for 10 years, taking a special interest in Quran and Hadith studies. He's the former head of the World Federation's Islamic Education Board office in Qum. In addition to teaching short courses in Qum, he also spent 2 years in Damascus, where he was involved in training future muballighin. He returned to the UK in 2010, and currently he is a lecturer at the Islamic College. So, we could welcome him with Sabwa.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you all today, and I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He blesses you all with the tawfiq to be successful in your studies and in your teaching and in your research and all aspects of your life, inshallah. As you can see from the title there, this lecture will be on methods and exegesis, methods and approaches to exegesis of the Quran. And unfortunately, this is a topic which hasn't been discussed and examined enough, especially in the English language. And it is a real pity, because if we understand the approach that an exegete takes or the method that he employs, then we are able to understand the underlying principles, values, systems, methodologies that he uses. And therefore we can get much more out of looking at his work. We can examine it very critically. And when we compare it with others, we are able to derive much more benefit as a result. So today, inshallah, we're going to be looking at trying to achieve these objectives. So first of all, we want to differentiate between exegetical methods and exegetical approaches. What is the difference between the two? Secondly, we want to define and give examples of the Quran by the Quran exegetical method. We'll see there's lots and lots of these exegetical methods, but due to the limits of time, we will only be able to look at one method and one approach. So the method that I have chosen is this one, Quran by the Quran. Then, just to list some notable exegesis that use this method, to define and give an example of a juristic, a fiqhi, exegetical approach. And then to list the main types of this approach and some important works for each type, inshallah. So, what are methods and what are approaches? Methods, the key word here is that one here, source. Exegetical methods refers to the use of a specific source in Quranic exegesis. Often, in fact, in Arabic, these are known as manahij, which is plural of manhaj. So, if that helps you to understand what this is all about, then so much the better. Manahij, as opposed to ittijahat, which are approaches. So examples include tafsir of the Quran by the Quran. So tafsir of the Quran bil Quran. Then bis sunnah, bil aql. This one here, bil ishara. I've translated it tafsir of the Quran by allusion, because allusion, it implies an implicit, a covert, a type of indirect indication to something. And so allusion, bil ishara, it includes a whole range of methods actually. It includes things like tafsir of the Quran from an irfanic type of way, in an irfanic type of way. Or sometimes they term it as a Sufi way, or even things like Ramzi, which is a symbolic way. And other names are given to this type of approach or method of tafsir of the Quran. So by allusion, bil ishara covers a whole range. Irfani method, Sufi method, a mystical method, a symbolic method, it comes under that. And there's lots and lots of discussion within that whole method. Some scholars, they accept some of these methods, others, they reject all of them completely. But today we won't have time to go into that one. And then this one, bil ulum. So tafsir of the Quran, bil ulum or bil ilm, by science. As for approaches, the key word here is influences. So here, with approaches, we are not looking at where they are getting their main source of their tafsir from. We are looking at things like what things affect that exegete's beliefs, his preferences, style, academic specialization, and other influences such as contemporary trends and social conditions. All of these, they have an influence on his Quranic exegesis. So this is the main difference. With sources, it's all to do, with methods, it's all to do with sources. With approaches, it's all to do with influences. Now, just some examples. You've got a fiqhi approach. This is the one that I'm going to use as the example today. But there are so many other approaches as well. Kalami approach, which is a theological one. A philosophical one, falsafi. A social or ijtimai approach, and a grammatical or linguistic, lughawi approach. So now you can imagine how many possible combinations there can be. If we put together the methods and the approaches, there are a whole range and there's a plethora of possibilities and mixes, combinations of approaches and methods. And this, we will see, has a great influence in a mufassir's or an exegete's tafsir. This is one of the reasons, in fact, we can say that there are so many different tafasir and exegesis of the Quran. When you combine the methods and the approaches together, you come with a whole plethora of possibilities and combinations. So let's move on now. Looking at the method of the tafsir of the Quran, bil Quran. As we mentioned before, that this is all about looking at interpreting the Quran by the verses themselves. So it's using the source here is the Quran itself. It's one of the oldest methods, dating right back to the time when Islam was brought about. And an example of this, in fact, we can see from Rasulullah A'zam sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, where he himself uses this approach in an answer to a question about what is the meaning of dhulm in this verse. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يَلْبِسُوا إِيمَانَهُمْ بِظُلْمٍ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمُ الْأَمْنُ وَهُمْ مُهْتَدُونَ. So he was asked, what is the meaning of this word here, dhulm? So he replies that it means shirk. But where did he get this answer from? He got it by referring it to this verse in Surah Luqman. وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِإِبْنِي وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. So you can see clearly the approach that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family took. Basically, he interpreted the word dhulm here by looking at the word dhulm here. And because the word dhulm here means shirk and polytheism, therefore the answer here is that dhulm here means polytheism. So we see this is reported in a Sunni tafsir and a Shi'i tafsir as well. So this just gives us an idea of the approach and the way that this type of method is employed, and the fact that it was employed by none other than the Holy Prophet himself, right at the beginning of Islam. Since then, of course, many mufassirin have taken up this approach. Often it is regarded as being the best approach. And you can see some examples here. Of course, many of these, you'll see the dates here. Allama Tabatabai, you will all have heard of, and his monumental work, Tafsir al-Mizan, uses this approach. All of these, of course, use this approach as their main one. Use this method rather as their main method. However, it doesn't mean that the first person to have used this was Abdul Karim al-Khatib. just because we have this in a chronological order, it doesn't mean it started there. Not only did we see the example of the Holy Prophet, but even we can give examples of mufassirin such as Tabarsi in Majmul Bayan, and Shaykh Al-Tusi in Tibyan. They all use this approach. So we're going back, in the case of Tabarsi, 6th century. So it was a very early approach used by these great mufassirin. We shouldn't think that these were the first ones. No, they used it as their main method. The others made use of it as well as other methods. But these ones are listed here. They're more contemporary, and also they used it as their main one. The others used it, but they also used other methods as well in their tafsir. Now, as an example, just to give us a better understanding of how this is employed in practice, apart from that example we saw from the Holy Prophet, let's have a look at this example from Sayyid al-Tabatabai and from Al-Mizan. It's all to do with the revelation of the Quran. He's famous, of course, for using this method a lot in his tafsir, but we should know that actually he doesn't just use this method. He uses a whole range of methods. It's not just this. Although his tafsir is famous of being a tafsir of the Quran bil Quran, but it's just one of the main methods he uses. He also uses sunnah and aqal and all sorts of other approaches as well. We can discuss that later if we have time, inshallah. So what he says with regard to the revelation of the Quran, now I'm sure you are aware that there are many different opinions as to exactly when the Quran was revealed and what is meant by the revelation of the Quran in Ramadan, for example, on the night of Qadr, and so on and so forth. He goes about answering this question, when was the Quran revealed, by adopting this approach of tafsir of the Quran bil Quran. He says that, look, what we need to do is examine the verses themselves. If we do that, we will get our answer. And he says that we see that the verses that talk about the revelation of the Quran on the night of Qadr reveals to us that Allah uses the words anzalna and unzila. And he goes on to say that these words are from the verbal noun inzal, right, from the root or the form if'al, and this indicates an all-at-once revelation, often called the daf'i revelation, the all-at-one, instantaneous, all in one go. But then he says that in other places, Allah uses the words nazzalna and nuzzila, which are derived from the verbal noun tanzil. The form is taf'il. And this gives a different meaning. It gives a meaning of a gradual or tadriji revelation. So what he does is, very skillfully, he examines all of these verses, he puts them all together, and he says that therefore we can put the two together and say that the Quran had two types of revelation, not just one. So this is how he goes about looking at all of these verses. So the first three, you will see that the root word nazala is put into the form of inzal, the form of if'al. So what are these three? The ones in blue are the ones that take this form, whereas the last one in red takes the form of tanzil, which is from taf'il. So he says that look at these ones first. Shahru Ramadan alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. Unzila from inzal. This talks about the Quran being revealed in Ramadan. Hamim wal kitab al-mubin inna anzalnahu fi laylati mubarakah inna kunna munzirin. Again, anzalna is from the root word inzal. And finally, inna anzalnahu fi laylati al-qadr. Again, from the root word inzal. So what Al-Mahdi Institute says is that all of these point to that instantaneous daf'i revelation of the Quran. However, he says that we also have a verse in the Quran which talks about revelation of the Quran, but not using the form inzal, but rather tanzil. And as we said earlier, this refers to a gradual revelation. وَقُرْآنًا فَرَقْنَاهُ لِتَقْرَأَهُ عَلَى النَّاسِ عَلَى مُقْثٍ وَنَزَّلْنَاهُ تَنزِيلًا. We separated the verse of the Quran into parts so that you could read it to the people with deliberation, and we revealed it gradually, part by part. So now, putting these together, he says that this is why, according to him, and also there are others as well. So Ayatollah Jawad Amili, he takes the same view in his Tafsir Tasneem. Even some Sunni scholars like Jalaluddin Suyuti in Al-Itqan, he takes the same view that there were actually two types of revelation of the Quran. One, if you like, if you can imagine, sometimes I use the words horizontal and vertical. There was one horizontal revelation of the Quran from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the heart of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his family, on the night of Qadr. That was the dafa'i revelation, the instantaneous revelation. But then there was a horizontal revelation. This is this one. The horizontal one referring to the fact that it was revealed over a period of 23 years as well. So according to these scholars, they say that on the night of Qadr, it was revealed in its entirety, in a very concise form, in a condensed form, to the heart of the Holy Prophet. But then, as the circumstances necessitated, it was revealed again, bit by bit, part by part, verse by verse, over a period of 23 years. And these scholars derive all of this from looking at verses in particular. There are narrated proofs as well, of course, but for the purposes of our discussion, we're just going to be looking at how other verses interpret this. So he says that as the Quran had been revealed in its entirety to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his family, beforehand, he was ordered not to make haste in divulging the contents of the verses before the revelation to him had been completed. So it was as if the Holy Prophet would almost say the verse before he was commanded to. And this is because, according to these scholars, he already had the knowledge of the Quran in his heart. So again, he uses the approach, tafsir of the Quran, bil Quran, to confirm his opinion even more. فَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ الْمَلِكُ الْحَقِّ وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressing the Holy Prophet, telling him, don't hasten in reading it before its revelation to you has been completed. Another verse, a similar point, لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه. So do not move your tongue with it to hasten it. Indeed, it is up to us to put it together and to recite it. So here we see, therefore, in conclusion, with regard to this first part of this presentation, the method that Allama Tabatabai takes is Quran, tafsir of the Quran, bil Quran, where he uses verses of the Quran to prove all of his points, and of course they can be confirmed by Sunnah and other things, but for the purposes of this discussion we just use the verses of the Quran. So now let's move on and talk about what exegetical approaches are. As we said, ittijahat is how they are translated into Arabic, and in Farsi, for the benefit of those who know Farsi, the words approach and method, they usually translate as Raveshha and Girayeshha. So verses that concern Islamic laws, this is what a juristic fiqhi approach is. So of course they only concern ayatul ahkam, as they are known, verses that relate to law, Islamic law. Of course there's a difference of opinion how many of these ayat of ahkam there are. It all depends on how they account them and how they consider this verse to be an ayah of ahkam or not. So there's a range, 500 to 2000 usually is quoted relating to Islamic law. So legal rulings now, so fatwa and other rulings are derived, things such as, if it's wajib, haram, mustahab, makruh, mubah. Usually the exegete is a mujtahid, or in the Sunni context, a mufti, and he explains his fatwa by his exegesis. And the main sources used here, Quran, Sunnah, intellect and consensus. Now I've just listed here so the main types of these approaches and some of their important works. I've sent the PowerPoint, so you can have it and you can look at these in your own time. But just to give you an idea, so all the major schools, they have works in this area. You can see they tend to use the word ahkam in all their titles. This is a sort of like giveaway clue to see, is this one going to be a juristic approach or not? And you can see it dates back, you know, a long way, and so you can look at this in your own time, inshallah. But let's have a look at an example. So here we're going to be looking at the verse of wudu, as it's known, the verse of ablution. And you see here how much of an impact it has on the mufassir's understanding. Not just the mufassir, but even a translator. Look at this verse, the famous verse of wudu, and compare these two translations. What are the things that really stand out in terms of differences between the two? Sorry?
You make it to the elbows.
Okay, what else?
Wash and wipe.
Wipe a part of your head.
Wipe over your head.
Right. Look at this. First of all, so you all know this translation of Ali Kulli Qara'i, and this one is obviously a Sunni translation. Now you see, therefore, the impact an exegete's approach has on translation or on his tafsir, but also on a mutarjim, a translator's translation. So you see this is the Sunni one, this is the Shi'i one. This one has no mention whatsoever of part. There's no mention of part of your head, whereas the Shi'i one does have that. And also about washing and wipe a part of your heads and your feet up to the ankles. Look at this one. Wash your faces and your forearms to the elbows, and wipe over your heads, and wash your feet to the ankles. It's very different. In fact, we can say it impacts people's lives on a daily basis throughout the world. It's not a small thing at all. And therefore, you see here what this translator or the group, what they have come up with is an implied meaning of fagsilu over here, isn't it? Because what they say is that wamsahu bi ru'usikum, so wipe over your heads, but then not that you wipe your feet, but really, mashallah, because I know you're all students and inshallah you all know Arabic grammar, you will see that according to them, this fatha it means that it's in the mansub, accusative case. And therefore what they say is that actually this is the waw of atf or conjunction is actually following wujuhakum and aydiyakum and therefore arjulakum. Now, what are the arguments that the Shia scholars put forward? Of course, it's been going on and on and on for years and years and years, so we can't solve it in 5 minutes. But just to give an idea as to how this approach works, you can see this. This is not mine, by the way. I got it from this source. But he's done a fantastic job in illustrating exactly how the two approaches work. You see, they are so much dependent on their approach. First of all, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. According to the Sunni school of thought, this arjulakum is in the mansub case because it follows, it is the maf'ul bihi, the object of faghsilu, right? So wash, what do you wash? Well, first of all, you wash this, and then they say, well, don't worry about that for now. What we will say is that we go all the way here and wash your feet until the ankles. Okay? This is according to them. They say that, in fact, this is a very good example for two approaches, not just a fiqhi approach, but also the lugawi approach. So this is an example that hopefully can kill two birds with one stone, if you like, because there's a lot of grammatical analysis here as well. Those who take a lugawi approach will look at this in this way as well. What they say is that therefore this is mansub and it is the maf'ul bihi of faghsilu here. They say that if it was a matter of wiping like the Shia say, then what would it be? It would be wa arju likum, right? Why? Because this waw, it means just like this is majroor, it's in the genitive case, they should also be majroor, arjulikum. Why isn't it arjulikum? So why do you Shia only wipe your feet and not wash when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly has stated arjulakum? The answer that the Shia give, of course there are a few answers. Let's see how many we can get through before time is up. First of all, they say that there are two readings actually. There is another reading which is less popular where arjulikum is read instead of arjulakum. Alright, forget that argument for now. Let's look at the main reading, which is arjulakum. What they say is that first of all, it is bad grammar to say that arjulakum goes all the way back, is related to faghsilu. People don't talk like that, let alone the greatest and most eloquent speaker that exists, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not talking about ordinary speech. We're talking about the most eloquent, the most perfect book. And therefore for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to talk in that way, where it's quite confusing, and to say that arjulakum goes all the way back there, in particular, bearing in mind the fact that in the middle you have another verb. Wamsahu is in the middle. People don't talk like that where they ignore a verb in the middle and go all the way back. That's one thing. So the natural meaning of the verse seems to indicate, the zahir and apparent meaning seems to indicate the fact that it's all to do with wiping, not washing. Secondly, they say that yes, it's true according to that main reading, it is mansub, it's in the accusative case. But it's mansub, it's still related to wamsahu, it's still related to wiping. Why? It's only mansub because it's mahallan mansub. Mahallan mansub means that it follows the mahal, the place of bi ru'usikum. I hope it's not too technical. It's just an example basically. What they say is that biru usikum, it's only majroor because of the ba. And in a tradition we know limakanil ba, it talks about ba meaning tabi'idiyya. Tabi'idiyya means referring to part. So wipe part of your head, right? That's the ba. When you have a ba there, it will necessarily give the noun after it a kasra. It becomes majroor. But really, if we were to look at this, what is the position of biru'usikum? What is the grammatical place, not the literal place? The grammatical place is mansub. Why? It's the object of wamsahu, isn't it? Wamsahu, wipe. What do you wipe? Your part of your head. So really, it's the object. It's the maf'ul bihi of wamsahu. It just happens to be majroor because of the ba. So this wa, this conjunction, arjulakum, is not following this literally. It's following its grammatical place. So it's like wamsahu arjulakum, which is fine. in Arabic, that is fine. Wamsahu, wipe. What do you wipe? You need an object, you need a mansub. Wipe your feet. And this follows, therefore, the mahal or the place, the grammatical place of biru'usikum, not its literal place. So these are the arguments put forward. Of course, like I said, it's been going back and forth for years and years and years. But these are the type of arguments you get in a fiqhi approach and in a lugavi approach. So I'll just like to read at the end, before we open it up to Q&A, a tradition that talks about this from Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam. And if anybody wants this, you can have this. It's got the Arabic and the English. I'll just read the English translation. It's all about why we wipe our heads and we don't wash them, and our feet as well. So the famous companion of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, Zurara, he says that I said to Abu Ja'far, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, will you not inform me from where you know and why you say that the wiping is on part of the head and on part of the 2 feet? Right? In fact, when I was looking at this, it gave me this feeling that, these great companions like Zurara and others, they were so close to the Imams that they felt very comfortable to ask them even such basic questions. Even though Zurara was a great scholar in his own right, but still they were able to ask even these sort of questions which are very basic. So it's an inspiration for everyone, in fact, that we can constantly learn new things, inshallah. So the Imam laughs and he says, "O Zurara, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it, and the book has been revealed from Allah, mighty and majestic be He, as such. For Allah, mighty and majestic be He, said, wash your faces. So we know that the face, all of it, must be washed." Okay, that's very clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Faghsilu wujuhakum." Then he goes on to say that Allah says, then he said, and your hands up to the elbows. وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. And he connected the 2 hands to the 2 elbows with the face. So we know that both of them must be washed up to the elbows. They're put together. It's all to do with washing. The face and the arms up to the elbows. Then he separated between the speech and said, and wipe part of your heads. So now we have wamsahu bi ru'usikum, part of your heads. So we know that when he said bi ru'usikum, the wiping is of part of the head because of the place of the ba. This is that famous station. Bi ba'di ras li makanil ba. Right? Because of the place of the ba. That ba means tabi'idiyya ba'd. It means part of your head. Then he connected the 2 feet with the head. So we see here, he's connected the arjulakum bi ru'usikum. Just as he had connected the 2 hands with the face. And said, and your feet up to the ankles. So we know that when the 2 feet are connected to the head, right? When that is connected to that, then the wiping is on part of them. You see the argument? He says that, look, this is connected to this. This is all about wiping, and it's all about wiping part. Therefore, this must also be about wiping, and it must also be about wiping part. Then wiping is on part of them. Then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained that to the people, but they neglected it, right? The people neglected it. It wasn't as if the Prophet didn't explain. He did, and he showed them, but it was neglected by them. So I think 40 minutes is almost over. So I'll stop here, and inshallah, if there's any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. Just in a summary, if you just give me an opportunity just to summarize everything, inshallah, just in a minute or two. Basically, the difference between methods and approaches is the fact that methods look at the sources. Where does the tafsir get his tafsir from? Things like the Quran, Sunnah, Aql, and science. Whereas approaches looks at influences. Things like his madhab, things like his specialization, like his preferences, his academic specializations. All of these things will have an impact on the tafsir. We saw the main works in each of these, especially with regard to the method of Quran bil Quran and the approach of a fiqhi approach, also a type of lugawi approach as well. We saw the main works, and we also saw the fact that there are different schools. We saw those 5 schools and the main works in each one as well. So that's the summary. If there's any questions, please go ahead. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Why is you corrected that you didn't mention Tafsir al-Quran bil-Ra'i because of its not being accepted?
Tafsir, sorry?
Bil-Ra'i.
Bil-Ra'i. Okay. Actually, Tafsir bil-Ra'i, speculative exegesis or exegesis based on one's speculative opinion. That is often discussed in the books with regard to different methods and approaches. But the ones that are really more accurate, I would say, they point it out very, very correctly, in my opinion, that actually we are discussing this simply because it is known as a type of tafsir, it's a type of method. However, it's only for the sake of completion. Really, it is not a method because it is batil. It is not an accepted method. It is not something that anyone can use. And therefore, when they discuss it, those that discuss it in such an accurate way, they point that out. That we are just going to discuss this briefly. They mention a few hadith, the fact that it's not allowed in Islam, and the one who does it, his place is in the hellfire, and this and that, and they give some examples. But really, they say that we are only mentioning this for the sake of completion, so that the whole discussion is complete. In fact, it is not a method at all, an accepted method. It is a batil method.
More questions?
Yes, please.
In one sense, can't we say that actually all the different tafsir types fall under the rubric of tafsir bil-Ra'i? If you look at it very, very analytically, because we can't get away from our minds influencing tafsir.
Yeah.
Or would you, on that comment, how would you?
We can't escape from Tafsir bil-Ra'i.
Yes, in one
Yeah.
sense, all of these different forms
Yeah.
are
In one way, type. Okay, Tafsir bil-Ra'i has a very particular sort of like definition. And so if it falls within that definition, yes. If it doesn't, then no. What that means is that basically we are allowed to do tafsir, of course. But there are parameters. There are guidelines, there are rules and regulations and principles. If one sticks to those established principles and established parameters for doing tafsir, then fine. If they don't, if they transgress and go beyond them, then it becomes tafsir bil-Ra'i. So the whole thing, it all depends on what type of tafsir you are doing. Is it falling within the usul? We have usul tafsiriyya, the usul of the tafsir. Is it abiding by the apparent meanings of the verses of the Quran and also the Sunnah? Is it in accordance with the aql? If it's within all of these, and there are lots and lots of principles that they are established, then it's not tafsir bil-Ra'i. But if it doesn't, if it goes against maybe a verse of the Quran or the Sunnah or the aql or one of these established principles, then it becomes tafsir bil-Ra'i, and that becomes haram. So basically, the true scholars, the true exegetes of the Quran, do it properly, they will always bear that in mind. Unfortunately, we do see from time to time examples where they do transgress and they go over. But those who are the real true mufassirin, they will abide by it.
Isn't there a danger of really, I mean, although we understand you're very right in the way that you've formulated the different methods. But one of the problems I've always found with the methods of tafsir and interpretation in general is that it seems to complicate. I mean, the Quran was a very simple, it was meant to be for the people. Here we're keeping it only, I mean, with all these principles and things.
Yeah.
It's now become purely a scholarly pursuit.
Yes.
Interpretations and what's the right interpretation is purely now in the hands of scholars. And so therefore it's become extremely technical, and I mean, Islam is a very simple religion according to the Prophet, right?
Yeah.
So there seems to be something over here that doesn't seem
Yeah.
right. I mean, there's a monopoly in a sense.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that we discuss, I mean, this is just an introduction, if you like. It's just an idea or a flavor of the whole topic. I normally teach this at the Islamic College over the course of a whole semester, and we look at the history of tafsir as well. And we look at each one of these methods and approaches in detail. I covered 2 or 3, if you include Lugawi, in one 40-minute talk. But when we look at it in detail, one of the things that we do is first we look at the history of tafsir. And as you rightly pointed out, it wasn't like that. If you have a look at tafsir in its early days, tafsir amongst the companions of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did tafsir in a very simple way. It was often just one word. I don't know, هذه الكلمة يعني this. It was just that type of thing. 1 word, 2 words, 3 words, 1 small sentence. However, there are a number of factors why it's gone down this way of a very detailed academic approach. First of all, it's quite natural actually for this to happen. Not only are we distant from the time of revelation, so over 1,400 years have passed. Not only, unfortunately, do we not have the Imam with us, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajuhu Sharif, who can guide us in an absolutely correct way, but also because of the fact that ulum, the sciences and knowledge, it has developed in so many sub-specializations and sub-branches and this and that. We've had not only that, but lots of different views and opinions. Islam itself, if you have a look at Islam itself, how many sects are there? How many opinions are there on one particular topic, on one particular issue? So when you look at it from that point of view, is it any wonder that tafsir itself has become so academic and so diverse?
Yeah.
Okay. If we look at the nature of Quran, we have no doubt it's a type of oral communication.
Yeah.
And there's no way to escape of this fact that it was a type of communication. It's a communicative discourse. It's a mutual communication between X and Y. And if it is a communication, and as the historian says, a khitab, it's a communication khitab. In each communication we have 4 major elements. The author, the audience, the text itself, and the context which this communication happened. And there is no way to escape this fact. If it is a communication, and we don't believe it's something different, then if it is a communication, and in each communication you have these 4 elements, unescapable elements, then we move to the next question. What's the aim of tafsir? To reveal the author's intention, or to reveal the message of the author to audience, and whether the audience is relevant or not. If the audience has changed, for example, different audience now are, subject of the communication. Sweden in 20th century, the same message wants to be revealed to the people in Sweden or Britain in 20th century. Then how we can work out the, let me say, context? For the Mufassirin in Islamic world from the beginning, I think there is a type of consensus. They said that the domain of tafsir is to reveal the intention of the author. So I want to see what's the real intention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying that. Then the question comes sometimes to reveal the intention. We may need to go somehow beyond the literal meaning or beyond the letters of Quran and Sunnah. How do you work out that? How do you consider these four elements? So can we create a room for, making Quran more relevant to the contemporary life by saying by change of context and by change of audience? The essence of message might be different for different audience and different contexts. Or we need to change our assumption that Quran is not a communication, or Quran is not a text to be related to the next or future generation and different people in different contexts. So how we can work out this type of, contextualization and giving essence to Quran beyond its historical background?
Yeah. It's like those traditions we have where the Imam, he states very clearly that if a verse of the Quran was only about one particular person, okay, at the time of revelation, you look at the Sha'n Nuzul and the Sabab Nuzul, and it's about this particular person, this is what happened. If it's just about that person and it doesn't have any relevance or any application to anyone else after that person, then what will happen is that when that person dies, that verse dies, isn't it? Because it was only relevant to him. If verses start to die, the Imam says, the book dies eventually. Right? So we cannot limit the interpretation of the Quran. Of course, Ayatollah Jawad al-Amili and others, they argue that there are certain verses which do not have universal or if you like, general application. They are very specific. However, apart from those few verses, all the other verses, they can be interpreted and in fact, they should be used for our guidance. Even today in 2014, in Birmingham, wherever we might be. Because the Quran is hudan linnas. وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى وَالْفُرْقَانِ. It is a book of guidance for all of mankind, for all time. And therefore, if you like, the proviso is what I mentioned before. First of all, I always say, with regard to fiqhi versus ayatul ahkam, we know what our duty is. Our duty is taqleed. Unless we reach a level of ijtihad and we can...
talking about mujtahid himself.
Yeah.
Not talking about muqallidin. A mujtahid, he says there are four relevant elements.
Yeah.
The author is important, the audience is important, the context is important, and the text is important. But which one is more important? These are, we have four different schools, hermeneutical school of here.
Yeah.
But in any case, do you consider the audience as seriously to interpret the text, or you are just deleting the audience? You say, no matter who is the audience, the text has the same meaning.
I see.
No matter what's the context, the same text has. So it means you are taking only the text into consideration.
Yeah.
And we know it's well established there is no text out of context. No
That's
text
right.
would have any meaning out of context.
That's why you get some mufassirin, such as Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi. In his Tafsir Namuna, it's regarded as being an ijtimai, as well as other types as well. But one of the types that is regarded as being is ijtimai, a social type of tafsir. And if you have a look at that, he definitely takes into account the audience, especially the audience at that time. You know, it was written way back in the day, and in fact, some people say that some parts really need to be sort of like rewritten. And in fact, if you have a look at, I have one of his really old sort of like prints of Tafsir Namuna. When I looked at that, and then I bought a new volume of that same surah. I saw it was double the size, and he had updated it, and it was completely different actually. It was rewritten. So definitely what Ayatollah Makarim does, and others like him who take this type of approach, they do take into account. He's constantly giving advice, especially to the youth, right? Especially to Jawanan. He sees all the time, and Nasl Jadid and this and that. He is always trying to give advice to the youth. And he's very akhlaqi actually. He gives lots of akhlaqi advice. So he's definitely taking into account. So you've got different people, and like I said, it will depend on the approach they take and the methodology that they adapt. That's why this whole area is so important for students, researchers, teachers, anyone who has anything to do with Quran and they want to do it in a serious way. These discussions are invaluable because it will give you it will enable you to look at a tafsir critically and examine it according to your knowledge of approaches and methods. And then when you compare it, you say, oh, now I think I know why he said it like this and he said it like that, why he went down this way, he didn't go down this way. You know, it's absolutely, and like I said at the beginning of the talk, this area has been very much neglected, especially in English.
Returning to this issue, which is exemplified by the wudu,
Yeah.
the diacritics and vowelizations were post, they occurred after the Prophet.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there scope, in the same way that when we look at fiqh and usul, we say in theory usul is prior to fiqh, but often it's a post-fiqh discourse, it's a justification of pre-existing fiqh. Now the people who were vowelizing the Quran and the people responsible for that, is there scope to say that they may have been influenced by pre-existing fiqh? So this arjulakum, whether it's majrur or mansub,
Yeah.
I mean, because again, it causes problems with this bar.
Yeah.
Even if it's got tab'id, then it should be majrur. There's all sorts of, it's really not clear cut even from a grammatical position. So it almost looks like, why has it been so overcomplicated? And we would have sorted a lot of problems out if the other reading was accepted with the other majrur reading.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there scope to say that perhaps the diacritics have been influenced by pre-existing fiqh? That's part of the first part. You can answer that first if you want to ask.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, no problem.
So I mean, what problems is that?
Okay.
Is that raised? And then also on this discussion of kind of post, the late things that took place after the actual revelation.
Yeah.
Possibly the ordering of verses and these sort of things, like Surah Ma'idah verse 3, where we have the verse which is a bit out of place.
Right.
You're just in terms of historically the verse which is
Al-Ghadir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with some issues. Perhaps we have to say, put our hands up and say, actually, is there scope for? I think infiltration is too strong a word, but we're already looking at something which has already gone through one sifting by people who maybe look at the Quran in a different sense, different way that we do, and the predominant Ahl Sunnah who would have believed that it should be mansub may have had some influence on the vowelization. Is there?
Okay. Well, for that, we need to look at the history of the compilation of the Quran. When we look at that, we see that once the Quran was codified into one major codex, and it was sent to the different major cities of the Islamic world at the time, what they did was they also sent the Quran, the Mus'haf, right, the Mus'haf as it was known then, with an expert qari. So it wasn't just sent like without, of course there wasn't any vowelization or anything like that in those days, but it wasn't just sent the text on its own. It was sent with a qari who was an expert qari, not just an ordinary one. And the idea was that basically everyone would therefore be able to have a Quran in all different parts of the Muslim Ummah at the time, which was exactly read in the same way. Now, of course, there's a whole discussion on how all the different qira'at, especially the 7 major ones, came about. So basically the harakat and all the vowels and everything were based on that. Also, like we saw in the tradition, the Holy Prophet himself, he didn't just recite these verses to the people and then the qurra, they heard them, they memorized them, and then when it came to spreading the Quran, they told people about how the Holy Prophet recited. No. On top of that, the Holy Prophet showed practically, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, recite, perform your prayer as you see me performing my prayer. As Zurara reports from Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, he says that the Imam told him, the Prophet did show this. He taught it to the people. He explained it to the people, but they neglected it. So we've got evidence like that as well. You know, so it's not just the recitation of it, but also practical demonstrations. As you know, our sunnah incorporates three things. It incorporates qawl, the actual sayings, the fi'l, but also the takrir. But the fi'l, of course, is extremely important. You know, how did the Holy Prophet perform Hajj? How did he perform Salah and Wudu and Tayammum and this and that?
Just, sorry, just to
Yeah.
pinpoint. So, what I'm saying then, therefore, if there was pre-existing fiqh where people were washing the feet,
Yeah.
and fine, so we've got an expert qari who has the correct.
Well, of course, we believe they weren't washing, they were wiping.
Well, the people, depending on.
Depending on how far back you go, of course,
Yeah,
isn't
so
it?
at some
Yeah.
stage, it became the predominant.
Yeah.
Predominant school was
Yeah,
washing.
yeah.
And at the time, even if there are qari, this notion of diacritics is still an immature notion.
Yeah.
Is it possible that actually, did you mention there's two readings?
Yeah.
So perhaps the other one is the correct one, and this has been influenced by their understanding, because their knowledge of wudu may predated their knowledge of the verse.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Indicate that Imam is reading arjulikum.
Yeah.
The riwayah itself means, because he's referring to
Yeah.
rules, he's not
What-
referring to her.
That's right. What the Shia Mufassirin and Shia Fuqaha even, what they say is that not only do we have two readings, but even the main reading from Hafs, from Asim, if we go according to that, still we have this justification, we have the answer. Apart from the fact that we have Sunnah as well. You know, we didn't look at Sunnah at all, but Sunnah itself tells us how the Imams performed it, how the Prophet performed it. Yes, somewhere down the line it was neglected. Somewhere down the line, you know, it was distorted somehow, you know, and it went another way. But, you know, we believe that we are upholding the Sunnah of the Prophet by performing our wudu by wiping.
Yeah, that wasn't doubting now.
Yeah. I understand.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think apart from the narrations
Yeah.
in which we have some instances of Tafsir on the Quran from
Yeah.
the Prophet
Yeah.
Muhammad, as far as I know, the first scholar who explicitly mentioned this phrase referring to his own method of Tafsir on the Quran is Ibn Taymiyyah.
Yes. Ahsan. Yes. Okay.
You didn't
No, I didn't mention everything. I've got it right here actually. Ibn Taymiyyah, he says in his work that tafsir of the Quran, bil Quran, is the best method of tafsir. So yeah, that is famous of Ibn Taymiyyah. 728. But of course, like I mentioned, we have people, so that's his death, 728 Hijri. But I did point to the fact that we have people even before then. So for example, Majma' and Tabarsi, 548. He died 548. So even before Ibn Taymiyyah. Shaykh Tusi 1067, so that's later. But at least Tabarsi, the famous Shia exegete Majmul Bayan, he uses this, as you know, he uses this method, but it's not like, you can't say it's his main method. You know, the ones that I put up is like really, most of them at least. Khatib, definitely. Jawad Balaghi, yes. Tafsir Mizan, of course. And Tehrani. They use Tafsir bil Quran as their main method. Others, some of the others I put up there, and some of these others, they use it and they have used it, but not necessarily in this very prominent way. Yeah.
Sorry, I think the example that you have mentioned from Al-Mizan is totally irrelevant in Tafsir al-Quran and Quran.
Oh.
Because this is an instance of Tafsir al-Quran and Lugha. If you refer to Lugha, you can clearly see that there are many Lughaviyin. It says that the meaning of Anzalna, Anzal is different from the meaning of Tanzil.
Mm.
So it has nothing to do with Quran.
No, I know this argument. Basically, I don't accept it though. Shall I respond? Okay. I know what you're saying. It's a Lughavi argument. One of the things is that with Alamat Tabatabai, one of the sort of like sort of like distinguishing features of his tafsir is the fact that he uses what is known as a jami' approach. By that we mean an all-comprehensive approach. So he will use Quran bil Quran, but then he'll use bis sunnah, bil aql, and then as for the approaches, he will bring in. This is what I want to really say. He will bring in all sorts of approaches where appropriate, where necessary. Okay.
I mean, even those who do not
Yeah.
believe in this method can rely on Lugha to make this distinction.
Okay. All right. Still, I wanted to mention one other thing, and that is this one. This one. What he says is, this is not like that Lugavi discussion we had here. Do you accept that?
Yeah.
This one. The fact that
Point is that this is irrelevant as well.
your next point.
Yeah.
Okay. Why?
Go to this.
This one. Yeah. Yeah. This one.
Yeah.
About not reciting it in haste.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Because the apparent meaning of these verses
Yeah.
is not that you already knew the Quran, then stop until we finish. It means that the part that you just revealed, do not say it to people until we finish it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This one here.
Yeah, and the same is.
This one doesn't have any indication of completion.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any indication of it being completed first. This one you can say, in fact, I know this argument, some people do say that, but this one, this is why I want, sorry?
This just says don't hate them.
Sorry?
This doesn't have any this just says don't read it quickly. It doesn't say, it doesn't relate to nazala or anzala.
No, I know. I wanted to bring verses that don't have that grammatical argument. If people say that what Allama has done is just gone down the grammatical Lugavi approach, I wanted to bring some others that no, actually he points to a number. Of course, he has a very sophisticated, sort of like a very sophisticated explanation about the whole nature of the Quran. You know about that, I'm sure. And how the Quran, the reality of the Quran, and the fact that it exists in Ummul Kitab, and then it was revealed over there, it's in its concise form, then it's revealed, and it becomes in an Arabic form, and it becomes separated. He mentions verse after verse after verse. If you have a look at his whole system of tafsir, his whole system of his idea about the Quran, it all kind of points to that same sort of like conclusion that he's trying to reach. I mentioned just these ones, especially this one, there's no mention of any Lugavi point here. It's a view of Allama Tabatabai.
But this verse is a bit dangerous verse if you go for the Sunni's interpretation. That's why I'm not interfering with this one. The Sunni's understanding of this verse is totally different. Doesn't help with Allama Tabatabai's aim anyway. So this is
Which is what
they talk about and what's. So it doesn't have any indication for
that. Yeah. Of course, there are some Sunnis who agree with Allama Tabatabai, like Jalaluddin Suyuti. He also believes in the double revelation of the Quran. So, of course, it's tafsir, and you've got different opinions.
The Allama Tabatabai's tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, actually, for the lawyer is not new. That's you're treating the book holistically. That's what the lawyer does. When you want to interpret any article, you have to see all the law and then, based on other articles, interpret the law. But that is the assumption that this book is not an oral communication. And this is a major assumption by Allama Tabatabai, heavily open to criticism. That assumption is not defendable, to treat Quran as something coming all of a sudden in one package. So if you treat it as an oral communication, then you can't go that far.
In fact, one of the things that Allama, not just him, but others, like Ayatollah Jawadi, he's taken the same approach, is this idea, sometimes I discuss it, when people talk about, perhaps trying to come up with the best approach, the best method, this and that. There is now, or not just now, but over the sort of like last few years at least, there's been this trend towards this Jami' approach. But Jami' meaning all-comprehensive approach. So what they do is they say the best possible way of interpreting the Quran is you don't just pick one method Quran bil Quran, or one approach, I don't know, Lugavi approach. What you do is you use all methods, all approaches where necessary and where appropriate. Now, you've got some absolute, exceptional geniuses like Allama Tabatabai and others who have and had a great and vast knowledge about so many different things, right, in different areas. So you see in Allama's work, for example, he has, all of a sudden he'll say after his tafsir, bahsun falsafiyun, bahsun ijtimaiyun, bahsun lugawiyun, right? Ajib is like, how many different types of bahs? Bahsun riwaiyun, right? He'll have all of these different discussions because he had this great knowledge and he was able to incorporate this. But now, what's happening we see recently, this is sort of like a recent, especially last 2 years I could say, is that not only has the sciences, not only have they really diversified and expanded, and you get sub-specializations and this and that, but also now you've got experts in a whole range of different disciplines. So now they engage in group tafsir. So instead of having one person who's an expert in all of these things, right, you've got like say 10 people. Usually it's supervised by a really great scholar, a really high-ranking mufassir, but they will all have their own specialization. So one will be an expert in lugha, one will be an expert in fiqh, one will be an expert in hadith, one will be an expert in science. And then they will look at verse or verses together, and then they will come up with a tafsir. Or sometimes, if not like physically all present, they will invite experts. They come across a verse relating to the natural world. They come across a verse relating to embryology. They will call, a specialist in that field and consult with them and look at it and this and that. So now it's moving towards that, where you have experts and groups of people because everyone is an expert in their own field. And, this is, in my opinion, a very, very good and important development in the way tafsir is being done now. Thanks.
I just want to go back to the verse of wudu.
Yeah.
It's clearly open to more than one possibility.
Yeah.
So would you say it's possible for different people to interpret it differently and still be equally correct due to the ambiguity of the Quran, if you leave aside specific narrations, which obviously every sect doesn't have?
Is it possible for them all to be correct?
Well, yeah, correct in their own way.
In their own way.
Or not incorrect.
Of course, with things like acts of worship, because it's the very nature of acts of worship, like wudu and salah and tayammum and this and that. There's a right way and then there's an incorrect way. So basically, it'd be very difficult to say that they are all correct. You can say that they all have an interpretation, and their interpretation is based on something. It's not just out the blue. The Sunni scholars, they have based their view and their fatwas, right, on their evidence. So from that perspective, you can say that they should all have a basis. Just like any student wants to say anything, he has to reference it. He has to have evidence. Are they all correct though? That's something else. That's something else.
Even within the Shias in itself, we have
Yeah.
mujtahids who say different things, and
Yeah.
obviously only one of them could be right, but we say that they're all justified in what they're saying.
Right.
So can we not extend that to all the different sects who all have some sort of
I see what you mean.
justification?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's a good question. Basically, I mean, when you look at a sect, the discussions within a sect, then you see that sometimes, I mean, the differences actually are not that great if you look at the commonalities, right? And if you look at the intricate sort of ways that they do differ, you don't get huge differences. Like you won't get anyone saying that within a particular sect, like say Shiaism, right? You won't get a mujtahid saying that it's wajib to wash your feet. You'll get they all agree on that. So you'll get small differences every now and then. and you get bigger differences outside that particular sect. But at the end of the day, you know, when you have this distance from the time of revelation, you don't have the presence of the Imam. Our duty, especially with regard to ahkam, as I said before, is a specialist area. Our duty there is either to be a mujtahid ourselves or to do taqleed or ihtiyat. But basically, it's these two options. The vast majority of people will have to do taqleed. And if there are differences, then, you know, that is something that has been stipulated in our religion, that you do your taqleed to, you know, the person who you think is the most knowledgeable. You know, that's that's the only way.
Just following up on what Maria is saying.
Yeah.
But could we not say that also from a mujtahid's point of view?
Yeah.
Coming from the point of view of theological view, saying that, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most wise.
Yeah.
And the mujtahid, although, you know, he might be as educated as he is at that level,
Yeah.
he could also not know the true meaning of that verse.
Yeah.
Having said that, that gives room for appreciating also the Sunni side in a sense. And what Maria is saying, you know, opening the floor to multiple kinds of acceptance of.
Yeah, in fact, that's a good question as well. I mean, basically, they always say, especially you'll see on those issues which are a little bit contentious, right? Wallahu a'lam. And even in fact, if you look at their introductions and that, they will often state the fact that, look, this is our best effort. We have tried our best based on our limited, obviously it is limited, knowledge. And we have tried our best to interpret the Quran as best as possible, including verses of fiqh. But, you know, Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best. They will never say that everything that we are saying is the truth and, you know, there's nothing but this is the be all and end all of it all. They don't say that. So it's like, in the absence of the Imam, what else can you do? They will try and observe all those principles and parameters and everything and try their best. But they will never say that this is 100% and I'm insisting this is the truth. No. If anyone does, then obviously that's not.
So you could accept.
Yeah, maybe you know, in the future people will have different opinion on something. That's always open. That's always open, and that is partly, you know, due to the reasons which I mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got last two. Okay, maybe we've got time, sorry.
Yes, it's allowed.
I'm just taking a layperson's stand here that with all these complexities in the tafsir, how does an ordinary person relate to Quran in their day-to-day life? Just as this verse says that do not hasten in recitation until the Quran has been revealed unto you.
Yeah.
Now, if you're taking it in context to the Prophet, and you said these verses are alive till the end of time.
Yes.
So how do I relate to that verse?
Right.
How do I make sense of that verse in my life that do not hasten in recitation until it has been revealed unto me?
Yes.
So which kind of
very good. Yeah.
do I take?
I mean, this is a key question. I spoke in different places about what I put forward as a course, basically, on deliberating over the Quran. I just call it the ABCD of deliberation. It's basically a 4-step. Each of the letters A, B, C, and D, they all stand for a stage, and it's a whole thing which I can send you some notes on if you like. It's a very in-depth discussion, but very in short, is you have to first of all appreciate the fact that the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for you. It's a book, it's a manual for life, for guidance. Secondly, you need to look at that in a very interactive way. And you need to deliberate over the verses of the Quran and apply it to the situation or the particular thing that you want guidance on. It's a very detailed thing. I'll send you some stuff if you like. But really the key thing is not to limit things like stories, things like incidents, historical things, not to limit it just to that particular time or place. You remove certain particularities, and I've called it the principle of flow and application. Jar wa tatbiq in Arabic. Jar is flow and tatbiq is application. So what you do is you look at a verse in a very dynamic way, very interactive way, and you make it flow and apply it to your particular situation. So just a very quick example, Nabi Shu'aib, right? Nabi Shu'aib, he was revealed for a particular people, Madian and Acre, and the situation of that time was such that they were cheating people. So one of the things that La tabkhasun nasi ashya'ahum, the verse says that don't cheat the people of their things. What we do is we take that and we say that, look, yes, it was revealed to Nabi Shu'aib at that time for those people, but if we remove those particularities of time and place and object, we can apply it to our lives. So that means we should not cheat anyone of anything, whether they are Muslim, non-Muslim, whether they are related to us, not related, young, old, here, there, wherever. It's mentioned in such a general way that we can use that and implement that in our lives. It's just one quick example,
So that his interpretation is not limited to mujtahids, then people in their day-to-day life can go to Quran in their
As long as, this is the key thing, that it's not just limited to mujtahideen or mufassirin. You and I, we must use the Quran as a dynamic, living book of guidance. But yes, exactly. That's it. As long as there's that proviso which was mentioned right at the beginning, that big proviso, and that is as long as we don't go into tafsir bil ra'y. Now that sometimes requires some guidance, some studying and this and that. There are parameters as to how far we can interpret things, correct way, incorrect way. As long as that is observed, then we must use the Quran as a book of guidance.
Sorry, Shaykh. I hope this doesn't sound facetious or flippant in any way.
I'm sure it's not.
I mean, do you think that we will ever have, or interpretation will ever end? I mean, you were saying when Imam comes, I mean, will he come with a different book, or will he interpret this one? In which case, if he interprets it, won't it just be another interpretation amongst many others? I mean, how do you see it? I mean, so...
Yeah. Well, the Quran, inna lil Quran zahiran wa batinan, the Quran has a zahir and it has a batin. It has an external and an internal. And then the butun are endless, basically, right? When you look at that, and you look at verses, وَمَا يَعْلَمُهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ تَأْوِيلُهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. Only Allah and the rasikhuna fil ilm know its ta'wil. You get an idea that actually the interpretation of the Quran and the levels of meaning will not end. So you will always get this sort of like interpretation happening, commentaries, exegesis, this and that. Not only that, but it's necessary. Because if it ends somewhere, like say we're talking about in the absence of the Imam, in the absence of an infallible who knows the ta'wil to its highest possible level, if tafsir, ta'wil, interpretation, exegesis, if that was all supposed to stop, like say this year, right, 2014, then what about in the future, in 20 years, 50 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years time, right? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, how is that going to be relevant to those people in that time? So the Quran constantly has to be, and that's one of the miracles of the Quran, that the Quran is able to be relevant and it is able to be applicable to people ila yawm al-qiyamah. Basically, it is the only book, it's the final book of guidance for who? For the time of the Prophet and his companions and those people? No, for us today and say 1,000 years time. Until Qiyamah happens, it has to be a book of guidance. and therefore it has to be interpreted. Again, it's that big proviso, parameters, making sure that we observe established principles, the sunnah of the Prophet, the guidance of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, established intellectual arguments and proofs and reasoning, as long as we're doing all that, then it's fine. It's when we start deviating outside that, then it becomes a problem.
I think on that note, then we'll close. And once again, thank you from the Institute, and I'm sure everyone here has benefited from the informative presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Hassan, thank you very much. Hassan.